Many myths exist about the Second World War that have never gone away even until this day, but perhaps the most prevalent of all, especially here in the United Kingdom, is the idea that if Hitler had had his way, we would all be speaking German, and the United Kingdom would become some kind of puppet, brutal dictatorship. This couldn't be further from the truth, however. If you take even the closest look under the surface, you will discover a very different reality. The fact of the matter is that Adolf Hitler had absolutely no intention of taking over the United Kingdom or implementing the German language there. Let's start from the beginning and find the truth of the matter. We have evidence of Hitler's views written plain as day as early as his stint in prison when he was writing Mein Kampf in his cell with Rudolf Hess. He felt that the British Empire and Germany had no natural reason to hate each other. In his head, he saw a strong Germany having an equally strong ally in the British Empire. Germany would control mainland Europe, while Britannia ruled the waves. The British Empire, in his eyes, was an incredible achievement and a force for good in the world, bringing civilization to the uncivilized. He did not, in any way, shape or form, view the British as an enemy, and even admired them, despite having spent many years of his life fighting them in the trenches. He wrote of how he had completely written off the lost lands in the West from the Great War, most importantly, Alsace-Lorraine in France. He saw no point in a war of revenge, and that the German people should head east, as they had done half a millennium prior, not west. On this point, he spoke endlessly, and kept his word. In the eastern lands lost during Versailles, where there was intense racial tension and discrimination against the ethnic German populations, yes, Hitler intervened, such as in the Sudetenland or Danzig, but in the west, where there was no such problems and the Germans lived in relative peace, he left these lands alone. Needless to say, if Hitler had no designs on Western Europe, what on earth would Hitler want from Great Britain, an island further away with no historical ties to the German nation? It's understandable that many think, oh, Hitler would have attacked Britain anyway if they aren't a historian and don't look beneath the surface. But if one takes just 30 seconds to look at a map, you'll understand that this isn't how wars work. A Brit fearing Adolf Hitler in 1939 is the same as an American today fearing the Russians because they entered Ukraine. They would only need to fear such an event if their own government chose to intervene in a war thousands of miles from home. In 1939, this is exactly what the British did. British policy was all over the place, and through a mixture of both fear and propaganda, the British government began to dish out guarantees to the nations of Eastern Europe. Even the nation of Liberia in Africa appealed for a guarantee. In the end, we know what happened. Up until the last days before the invasion of Poland, Adolf Hitler frantically appealed to the United Kingdom, trying to make them see sense and not involve themselves in Eastern Europe. He felt that the British had no idea who they were dealing with by allying with the Polish government. All over Western Poland, atrocities were being committed against the ethnic German civilians there, and the reports Hitler was receiving put the figures at 10 times the actual number, and the actual number was high enough. Ultimately, Hitler felt he was left with no choice, and he invaded Poland. Chamberlain himself tried to back out of his guarantee against Poland, but he was threatened with a coup by the warmongers in Parliament, like Winston Churchill, a man who was being paid by shadowy figures in the City of London to push for war against Germany, chief among them being Henry Strakosch. Ultimately, Chamberlain backed down to this pressure and declared war on Germany. Remember this point. Great Britain declared war on Germany, not the other way around. When Hitler was given the news that Great Britain had declared war, he was absolutely distraught. He was living in hope that the British were mostly bluffing, and that they would never involve themselves in such a pointless foreign war with no clear goals. He looked at Ribbentrop, his foreign minister, and said, "What now?" Ultimately, he decided on his what now, and began appealing to the British almost immediately as soon as the war started. "Let us take back Danzig," he said, "and we will leave the rest of Poland alone." He had no interest in another war against France and Britain, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. When Poland fell, he appealed once more for peace, both officially and unofficially, through back channels or neutral countries like Sweden. Again, it fell on deaf ears. Many in the British government wanted peace and saw no point in this war, as really, what on earth were their aims? No one knew. For months after the collapse of Poland, the period known as the phony war began. Both sides didn't want to attack each other, and rightly didn't understand the point. Everyone just sat on their hands and waited for peace to arrive somehow. One man had other ideas though, and Winston Churchill began to relentlessly push for an intervention in Scandinavia to acquire the iron ore there, or at least prevent the Germans from getting it. After a complicated series of events, during which the plans were leaked to Germany, he did eventually get his way, and one day after the British fleet set off to mine the Norwegian waters, Germany struck and completely took over Norway. It was a total fiasco for the British, and it pushed Hitler to finally invade France, which it flattened in weeks. Now, with total control of the continent, Hitler thought surely the British could be compelled to come to peace. He offered all sorts to the British, and perhaps the most incredible offer was that he personally offered to guarantee the British Empire and send troops to their aid if they were ever attacked. He wanted no problems between Germany and the British. He was happy to restore French independence. All he cared for was the lands in the east. Hitler wasn't completely benevolent, however, and wished to take more of Poland than he had originally planned to, but regardless, the terms were mild for the British. Again, he had no plans for taking actual British soil, and the British would lose basically nothing. There was some talk of returning old German colonies, but nothing too serious. All they would lose would be their prestige. Across the British Channel, though, Churchill had other ideas. He had secured a promise from Roosevelt that the United States would enter the war in the future. All he had to do was buy time. Winston whipped up the British people to his side and threw the United Kingdom's biggest peace advocate into prison, along with his wife, keeping their young children from them for years on end. Oswald Mosley was only eventually released when he was becoming incredibly ill from the damp, dingy cell he was thrown into without committing a crime. The so-called Operation Sea Lion was no more than a theory. Historians talk endlessly about how Hitler had grand designs of invading Great Britain and conquering it, but ultimately this was nothing more than a theory that was pushed for by certain elements within the Nazi Party, but Hitler himself saw no interest in this and saw it as a waste of time. He was over the moon when he could finally ignore the British and head east, which hopefully also meant peace with the British when he was victorious. During the entire war, only one area of British territory was properly controlled by Germany and occupied for a considerable period of time. This was the Channel Islands, where I was born and have lived for the vast majority of my life. Let's look at the we'd all be speaking German theory. It's easy to deconstruct in seconds. During the occupation of the Channel Islands, we were in fact allowed to talk English, and we were not forced to speak German, and the occupation overall has been called the quote, model occupation due to how friendly it was. Almost no issues arose between the British people here and their German occupiers. Ultimately, as the war dragged on, Hitler never lost his love for the British people despite everything. He only spoke of his hatred for Winston Churchill and those who were pulling his strings and paying him to act so belligerently. He saw the British people as completely innocent and that they were just being misled by propaganda and their now dictator, Churchill. Many Nazis died in the closing weeks of the war, still innocently believing that the Allies would see sense and begin to fight the Soviet Union. Weren't they the true enemy, after all, many thought? In a way, this theory was correct, because as soon as World War II ended, the Cold War began, and the entire war was essentially for nothing. The British people gained nothing from the Second World War, and rationing didn't even end at home until 1954. The British Empire was lost in a couple of decades after the British people had spent hundreds of years building it, and now Britain is a shell of its former self. It is nothing but a second-rate power with almost no sovereignty of its own. The former great nation of Great Britain is now completely owned by corporations, and in reality, it is a puppet state of the United States, who since the Second World War have been the complete and utter world hegemon. So in conclusion, the British people were sent to fight and die against Nazi Germany for a cause they did not understand, for interests that were not their own. The post-war propaganda that Churchill saved us in our darkest hour is so far from true it is almost laughable. Adolf Hitler committed many, many crimes in the East and did many horrible and outright evil things, but one thing he is certainly not guilty of is wanting a war with Great Britain. All those who died, be they French, British, Norwegian or the rest, all died because Great Britain chose to declare war on Nazi Germany on that fateful day in 1939, and almost none of them understood why, besides what the propaganda factory in London was telling them. Thank you very much for watching. If you're new to this channel and you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and don't forget to leave a like. Most of all though, thank you to my patrons who make these videos possible. If you'd like to join our Discord or our weekly Hearts of Iron 4 games, then please consider signing up with the link in the description. Even the $2 tier helps more than you can imagine. Thank you to Lobster2U, Darway Lololol, Sigmar, Emperor Titus, Luke David Murphy, Chechen Natsok, Anton Berglund, Levi E, Lanza, Friendly Brian, Mr. Malabar, Bushak, Firefly Enterprise, Henry Unruh, Evan Brightfield, and Chef Jeff.